this edition, which concentrates on the design and build of the viaduct and has 2 Jubilees with 2 full rakes of Stanier Coaches for your enjoyment. And I'll explain how I came by the second rake of Stanier Coaches as well. So let's get on with the continuing work in designing and building the viaduct. I thought I would try something a bit different in terms of recording for this video, and do this next few days as I'm working more as a kind of short blog. So you get to get my diseased thinking process as it develops. At the end of the last video, you saw that I had positioned the lock kit that I'd got in its position. And now what I'm trying to work out is how the portal will work through the curve of the viaduct. And so you can see this is in position. It's 2 inches across, and I've worked out precisely where that is on the curve as it goes round from the angles that I'd used before. And what I'm doing is putting parallel lines through the arch, which means that the portal is going to be on a skew. It's not going through sort of at right angles to the point here. So what I'm now going to do is to cut the deck, which you already saw, and to cut the fascia of the viaduct. I've redesigned the look of the viaduct because plainly I couldn't have all the same size because this needs to be bigger. And I thought it made more sense not to have anything this side of the viaduct, so that's just going to be a blank wall. Then you'll get the lock going through here, and at the moment I've got all of these, there's 6 of them I think, that will go through. Now there's a couple of things just to quickly pick up. If you put the lock in position where it's going to be, you can see that there's not much headroom here. There's plenty actually in N-gauge. You'll easily get a full-size 6-foot man walking under the far side there. But that will mean that the landscape is more likely to be sitting at this level, and a lot of this part will be below the level of the landscape, I think, for most of them. Because this viaduct doesn't sit up really high. I'm going to be filling in a lot of the area. But it is really useful to be able to look at this down here. So now I'll get on and I'll cut out the first fascia, and we'll see what it looks like put together and sitting on the layout. You can see here that I've cut out the fascia and stuck it to the track bed template. Which was useful to do because it reminded me of something I learnt with the earlier viaduct, which is if you can, use fairly short sections of card when you're trying to fit it onto a curved surface, because although this is a piece of A4 which I've cut that from, it's too long, and it's really quite hard to get it to stay in place while you're trying to fit it. Which is why eventually on the previous viaduct I cut it down into at least, I think there's at least 2 pieces in either side. But this has also been extremely useful for another reason, which is this portal, when it lays flat, is 2 inches wide, and one of these fits into it. When, however, you curve it round the 2 inches that's on the curve, it brings the 2 sides of the portal into each other by, as it happens, a rather handy 2/10 of an inch. So the portals are going to this portal is going to have to be cut wider to be able to fit this in, and so it sits snugly to its walls. So that's one immediate useful thing from doing this mock-up. Otherwise, I think this has really helped me. Well, it's really helped me obviously in terms of how I'm going to start to put it together. And the need for this one here, which will be going directly straight through there, to be 2/10 of an inch. The thing I've got to check now is what happens on the other side, because it similarly is going to be bending and I think I'm going to need to cut the portal bigger, but I'll wait and see. I can do that from the master plan by measuring the angles to the two sides of the portal entrance. I've also started thinking a bit about what I'm going to use to face the viaduct, and initially I was thinking Metcalf card. I had a number of people suggesting looking at scale scenes, but I'm beginning to come round to the idea maybe of using plasticard embossed brick sheet, the dressed stone, 2mm dressed stone, which I've got on order to come. I just think it will make it look more substantial as a bridge if I can use something with more texture on it, I think, than any of the cards, but we'll see. We'll see when it comes. And I also want to try, I think, with the design of the top. This is actually cut too high, I discovered. I managed to measure that 1/4 of an inch too high, so it's not quite as high a wall around the viaduct. But I want, if I can, to put some refuges in over the top of the piers, so that there's somewhere when, if someone be walking along and a train come, they've got somewhere to stand safely. And that's going to mean this design, the design that I used for the old viaduct, I can't use because this card goes right to the top. I think it's in two sections, one to there and one to there. But I will need to build the wall on the top differently because I've got to be able to put the refuges in. So that's where my thinking's going. Hopefully the card, it's Easter Sunday now, Monday. So the card won't be here for a couple of days. And we'll see where we get to. And I'll also have a few more thoughts, I hope, about the way in which I'm going to construct the bridge, because the carcass can really be no more than a skeleton around which the other card and things will go to create the external shape. So I'm going to start having a think about how I create the skeleton around which the fascias will be put on. What you see before you is the newest rake of coaches to join the fleet. This was from my first foray, and I think there will be more, into buying from a recognised auction house as opposed to eBay. I wanted to get some more Stanier Coaches so that I could have a rake of Stanier Coaches to run behind Nelson. This is Nelson, the Jubilee, because I thought it would look really good to have two rakes of Stanier LMS coaches running behind the two Jubilees. And you'll be able to make your own mind up about that, because the running session a bit later in the video is indeed Nelson and Trafalgar pulling their respective rake of coaches. To buy new Stanier coaches, well, the recommended price I think is £45 a coach. Rails are doing them for about £39. On eBay, second hand, they're going for around about £30 a coach. And I thought, I wonder if there are any coming up in any auction houses. So a bit of Googling showed me an auction coming up beginning of April. And I had a look through, and there was a lot of 10, well, they were described as BR maroon coaches, all supposedly in excellent condition, in excellent boxes. And the guide price, I think, was something like £90 to £110 for 10 coaches. They had given the individual model numbers for each of the coaches. And when I had a look through that, there were in fact 7 LMS Stanier coaches and 3 BR maroon Stanier coaches. So I thought, oh, well, I'll give this a go. Remembering, as you must, that the hammer price is only part of the eventual costs that you will pay. So once I looked up what the buyer's premium is, I realised that the most I wanted to pay for these 10 coaches was around about £200, because that would still be at £20 a coach, less than the cost of the any other second-hand item. So I put a bid in of £150, which obviously was successful. It was quite exciting watching it live, and they were desperate to get another bid, but no, my £150 won the day. The fees, the buyer's premium on top of this was then £36, including VAT. Is that right? £31, including VAT. They're providing you with a service, so the buyer's premium carries VAT with it. The items themselves did not carry VAT. So it was £150 plus the remainder, plus the buyer's premium. And then in addition to that, something I hadn't quite bargained on being as expensive was postage and packing, which was £25. That seems to be a flat fee across lots of auction houses. But because that is the service that you're being provided with, VAT is payable on that as well, which meant that was another £5. So in total, these 10 coaches cost me £216. You can only see 8 of them here. There are 2 more, which I haven't got on behind any of the rakes at the moment. But it's certainly opened my eyes to what is out there if you would like to spend a bit of time Googling in terms of auctions where you can leave commission bids, which is what I did, which I think is the safest way, because you just say, that's what I'm prepared to pay. You can sit and watch it, but I can see that if you were bidding live, the temptation to, oh, just another £10, just another £10. And what you've got to remember is that generally the added fees are going to be around, including VAT, about 25%. So for every £1 more you bid, that's £1.25 you'll pay. Leave aside the question of what the eventual postage and packing costs will be. But I have to say, when they arrived, they were very accurately described. In fact, the boxes, when I took these out, all of them still had the paper insert with which they come straight from Farish. All of them had the little plastic bag unopened inside. And looking at the wheels of all these coaches, I don't think these have ever been run. So even at £216, which is the total amount that I spent for 10 brand new coaches, I'm still very pleased. I have to say there was some interesting lots. This was a big sale just of model railway stuff, and there were 50 lots, I think, that were solely N-gauge. Locomotives, both steam and diesel, going for around £120 hammer price for, say, 2 locomotives. So it's well worth spending a bit of time Googling, though I suspect very expensive. But there we go. You'll see these running later. The running session, which I've just recorded, has these 2 sets of Stanier coaches running, but I thought I'd just tell you about my foray into bidding on real auctions. An update on where we've got to. I've worked out where the portals should be on the fascia for the outer edge and cut it into place. I've also cut this the right height. You can, if I show you end on, oops, sorry, you can see that that one is 1/4 of an inch lower. So that's the proper height for the bridge. And if I come down here, you will see that my portals all lined up beautifully. They're very kind of them. So I know the calculations are working, but it has really reminded me just how tricky it is trying to cut all of those accurately over so big a distance, and has reinforced my intention to do this in a modular way, in that I will build first of all the deck with some thin, probably about 1/2 inch deep, retaining card to give me a base onto which to stick other things. I will probably put some legs in, or again to provide something to which to stick whatever I use as the facing card. The plastic card hasn't arrived yet, so I'm not sure whether it's that or whether it will be Metcalf or Scalzine's texture paper essentially. But I also want to separate the piers and the walls from the arches, because what I have in mind now is that there will be a plinth that sits there into which the arches are going, and from which below the piers will come. And that will sit probably, I don't know, 1/10 of an inch wider all the way round. That will mean, and that another benefit of that is that I'll be cutting smaller pieces, which should make putting it all together easier in terms of lining up portals. And it will also help me build the arch up here will be separate from the walls, which again will make it easier because this is on a skew. Just cutting one piece of paper to go on that skew will be quite tricky, I think. But it, I think, gives me more flexibility to try and have perhaps a different texture for the underneath of the arch than may be true of the piers that sit below, which is quite common looking at images. You'll also see in the frame this from NGaugemodels. It's a cracking little coal barge, which I'm really impressed with. It's 3D printed and painted. It comes like this. And I'll put a link in the description in case you want one of your own. This is about 50 foot long, I think, about there, which if I went with this length would make the lock a bit smaller, but I think I'll build the lock so it can take up to a 70-foot barge. Some really useful comments in the last video about the size of the lock and the barges that might go in there. So that's where we've got to at this stage. The next thing I think is to try and have a go building, seeing what it would be like trying to create the separate sections that I have in mind for the way that I'm going to put this together. Because once I've worked out in my mind how it all goes together, I can then, when I get the card and make up what I'm going to use for the exterior, really get on with what the skeleton construction around which everything will be fitted will look like. So to complete the quartet of posts, as I've been working my way through the start of constructing the viaduct, this is another mock-up, and as all mock-ups, it really shows you the value. With the previous version, I wasn't 100% sure whether the portals were still wide enough to take the canal going through. And building this one showed me that they weren't wide enough, but for a reason that I hadn't given enough thought to, which is the angle at which the canal is going through the curve of the arch. If I come up here, you can just about see down there the canal coming out, and it's obviously going through at quite an acute angle. I'll put up here a picture that I took of the underside of the viaduct. And what that means is that although this, I think this is actually 2.5 inches wide, I think I may have described it as 2 before, although the gap to be able to put this in, if this was going in parallel to the entrances, needs to be 2.5 inches wide, it's actually going through at an angle. So you have essentially through here to make it wider, because using your good old Pythagoras, you've effectively got the hypotenuse of a triangle going through there. So this has been taken apart, which is why it's sticking off there, to recut the portal on this side to be able to get the angle right. This one was also cut a little bit. This was about 0.2 of an inch too narrow. This one needed considerably more, because that's where the angle really cuts across the canal. But it does work. You can see that I've got the canal pieces going right the way through. It's enabled me to have a look at what that angle needs to be, because I'll have to change the radius of that curve because I've widened the portals a bit. And I was able to put a piece of paper in to get an idea of what shape the brick paper or brick card will be to create the correct shape for the vault of the arch. But that's another big step forward. It has convinced me of the need to build this in a modular form. I think what I probably will do is I'll build the deck as one single thing, because cutting that and getting it to fit together I can just see being a nightmare. But I can see my way all the more of putting the deck on and then beginning to think about whether I create this as a single piece or as separate sections, which I still need to resolve. But I think I have a way in which I will, as I think I said in the last one, the deck will have either side of it a piece of card, probably about 1/2 inch thick, which will go round and form the basis onto which other things will be stuck. And I think I am going to create these arches as separate pieces. This piece may be different, because having done this once now, I can see how I might create that as a single piece. This is where the second or the first of the normal arches will be created, and they're going to go straight through. I don't need to worry about so tight a skew. They'll just go straight through to make it easy for the purposes of doing the arch. But this has been a very useful process from the first time I drew it to then changing it, doing the mock-up. This is a second mock-up, but I think the next stage I will want to do is to build one of the normal sections and to try and build it in the individual parts that I think I'll be using to create each of those sections. So I hope to get on with that, and you'll see that in the next video, which as I will explain later won't be for a few weeks. So that brings this to a close. Well, that just about brings Elvenhome to a close for this edition. The next edition won't be now until early June. because we're going off on holiday a year later than intended to Orkney, which is just a beautiful place to be. So we're going 2 weeks up in there, and I want to have time when I get back to be able to do something and then to put a video up. So I suspect the 1st or 2nd week of June will be the next edition. And there's obviously plenty for me to do in trying to get the viaduct done. And I think what I'm setting myself the target of doing is finishing the viaduct by no later than the end of June, and seeing what else I can get on with in the meantime. Otherwise, it's all going to be about one thing. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please do give it a thumbs up. That's always very welcome. And if you haven't subscribed, well, please do subscribe, because it'd be great to have you along and you'll be able to watch the completion of the work on building the viaduct. But until I speak to you again in June, look after yourselves, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.